world of labor as we knew it is becoming a thing of the past. On factory lines, where workers once stood, mechanical robot arms now move. In offices, algorithms analyze data faster than any analyst. In call centers, voice bots answer customer questions. The fourth industrial revolution is not just changing technology, it is transforming the very essence of human labor. When a machine can do your job better, faster, and cheaper, what happens to your sense of self? What happens to professional identity when a profession disappears? The psychological consequences of automation affect the fundamental foundations of how we perceive ourselves and our place in the world. This transformation gives rise not only to fears but also to new opportunities. Every wave of technological change is followed by a re-evaluation of what it means to be human in the world of work. And today, we stand on the threshold of the most massive such re-evaluation in human history. The history of labor automation began long before the advent of computers and robots. Already in the 18th century, the spinning jenny allowed one worker to perform the labor of 8 spinners. This caused the first psychological trauma of mass automation, the fear of losing not just earnings, but the very meaning of existence. Luddite weavers, who destroyed machines in the early 19th century, fought not so much against technology as for the preservation of their identity. "I am a weaver" was not just an indication of a profession, but a definition of a person's place in the social structure, a source of pride and self-respect. The Industrial Revolution gave rise to widespread anxiety and a sense of helplessness in the face of technological changes. However, history also shows another side. Each wave of automation created new professions and opportunities. After the mechanization of agriculture, factories emerged. When production was automated, the service sector flourished. With computerization, an entire information technology industry arose. Today's fear of artificial intelligence remarkably resembles the panic of weavers 200 years ago. The only difference is in the scale and speed of changes. If adapting to new technologies used to take generations, now this process shrinks to a few years or even months. Psychologically, we don't have time to readjust. But history teaches us. Humanity has always found new forms of labor and self-realization. The key lesson from the past is that technology does not determine our destiny, but rather how we adapt to it and what meaning we invest in our activities. "This can't happen to me." That was Mikhail's initial reaction, an engineer with 20 years of experience at a car factory, when he heard about the introduction of an automated production line. 6 months later, his workstation was taken over by a robotic system. Psychologists identify 5 stages that a person goes through when confronted with displacement: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. This path is familiar to thousands of bank employees whose functions have been taken over by online applications, to cashiers who have given way to self-service systems, to accountants whose work is now performed by software. A study conducted by Oxford University showed that 47% of workers whose functions were automated experienced symptoms of depression within a year of their dismissal. The heaviest blow is dealt to professional identity. "I was always a cashier. Who am I now?" Elena asked herself this question after 20 years of working in a supermarket. Psychologists note that the loss of professional identity is comparable to losing a part of oneself. This is particularly acutely experienced by older generations, for whom work was not just a source of income but also the foundation of self-respect. Paradoxically, even those who retain their jobs often experience survivor's guilt, a feeling of guilt towards dismissed colleagues and the fear of being next. However, not all stories end tragically. Some find in displacement an opportunity for re-evaluation and growth. The same Mikhail, having gone through all stages of acceptance, underwent retraining and now works as an adjuster for the very robots that replaced him. "I didn't just return to the factory. I returned with new knowledge and skills, he says. Mikhail's story shows that the key to successful adaptation is not resisting inevitable changes, but being ready to change with them. Automation isn't just changing the tools of labor, it's transforming the very nature of human motivation. When a robot takes over routine work, an astonishing psychological shift occurs. Extrinsic motivation gives way to intrinsic. Just yesterday, a person worked primarily for a salary, but today, they seek meaning, creativity, and self-realization. Toyota was one of the first companies to recognize this phenomenon. After automating assembly lines in the 2000s, management faced an unexpected problem. Employees, freed from monotonous operations, lost motivation. The solution was the Kaizen for the Soul program. Workers were given the opportunity to participate in improving production processes. The result exceeded expectations. Productivity increased by 30% and job satisfaction doubled. The banking sector experienced a similar transformation. At Spare, after automating document processing, former clerks were offered positions as consultants for complex financial products. Motivation shifted from processing more papers to helping a client solve a life problem. Psychologists call this phenomenon Maslow's motivational shift, a transition from basic needs to higher ones. Research shows that employees whose routine tasks are automated demonstrate a higher level of intrinsic motivation under one condition: if they are provided with autonomy, opportunities for development, and meaningful tasks. Otherwise, a motivational crisis ensues. Companies that successfully manage this transition create a new motivational triad: mastery, autonomy, purpose. An employee strives not just to perform functions, but to excel in a meaningful endeavor, make independent decisions, and see a broader meaning in their actions. The paradox of modern automation is that while it frees us from physical labor, it creates an unprecedented psychological burden. We lift fewer heavy objects, but process more information. Our bodies rest, while our minds work at their limit. A study conducted by Stanford University in 2021 showed that 70% of office workers experience a new form of stress: technostress. This condition arises when a person is constantly forced to master new programs, platforms, and devices, without having time to adapt to the previous ones. The brain literally cannot cope with the pace of change. Programmer Alexei from Novosibirsk describes his experience. Every 3 months, a new framework appears that needs to be mastered. I don't have time to learn one before it becomes outdated. It's an endless race without a finish line. Another form of modern stress is information overload. The average office worker today processes 5 times more information than their colleague 20 years ago. The brain has not evolved for such a load. The result is cognitive exhaustion, where even simple decisions require enormous effort. Workers in emotional professions suffer especially. Nurse Irina says, "Before, I communicated with patients. Now I spend half my time filling out electronic forms. The computer takes energy that I could have given to people." Studies show that healthcare professionals spend up to 40% of their time interacting with systems, rather than with patients. This leads to a new type of emotional burnout. When a person is exhausted, not from an excess of human communication, but from its deficit, coupled with an excess of interaction with machines. I was a miner my whole life. Now my mind is automated. Who am I now? Victor asked himself this question after losing his job following 40 years of underground experience. His story is one of thousands illustrating the deep crisis of professional identity in the era of automation. For many of us, a profession is not just a source of income, but a part of our personality, defining our self-perception and place in society. When a profession disappears, a person loses not only income, but also an important part of themselves. Research shows that 70% of people whose profession has been automated go through a real identity crisis. This is especially difficult for representatives of traditional professions with a strong corporate culture. Train drivers, typesetters in printing houses, cashiers. For them, their profession was not just a skill, but a way of life. Part of a heritage, often a family one. Svetlana, a former librarian with 30 years of experience, recounts, "When the library was digitized and staff was cut, I didn't just lose a job, I lost a world where I was an expert, a mentor, a guardian of knowledge." Psychologists note the blurring of professional boundaries as a key trend in the modern labor market. Professions that existed for centuries disappear in decades or even years. They are replaced by hybrid specialties requiring constant skill updates. A person has to not just change jobs but completely rethink their professional essence. However, this crisis harbors potential for growth. Victor's story continues. After going through despair, he found a new calling, becoming an industrial safety instructor. "I still share my knowledge about the mine, but now my task is to save lives, not to extract coal," he says. In a world where artificial intelligence becomes a colleague, not just a tool, a new psychology of labor relations is born. We are learning to cooperate with systems that think differently than we do. Surgeon Anna from St. Petersburg recalls her first experience working with a robotic-assisted system. "At first, I didn't trust the machine. It seemed impossible that an algorithm could understand the subtleties of an operation. But gradually, a strange feeling emerged, as if I had acquired a silent but incredibly attentive colleague." Psychologists call this phenomenon automation of trust, the gradual transfer of responsibility to intelligent systems. A study conducted in 20 clinics worldwide showed that doctors who regularly work with AI assistants are 40% more likely to heed their recommendations than the opinions of human colleagues. Another phenomenon is the anthropomorphization of technology. Scientists from the Quantum Physics Laboratory admit that they have given names to their AI systems and sometimes discuss scientific hypotheses with them, as if they were talking to living colleagues. We know it's just a program, but the brain is wired that way. It seeks social interaction even where there isn't any, explains quantum physicist Dmitry. In creative industries, fundamentally new forms of collaboration are emerging. Composer Elena creates music together with a neural network. This is not a replacement for creativity, but a new tool. The algorithm offers unexpected solutions, and I choose those that resonate with my vision. Successful human-machine cooperation requires new psychological skills. One needs to be able to formulate tasks for systems, interpret their solutions, and find a balance between trusting technology and maintaining critical thinking. Automation is radically changing not only production processes, but also the social fabric of the workplace. Offices, where people have built relationships and exchanged ideas over coffee for decades, are transforming into semi-automated spaces with minimal human presence. A study conducted in 2022 showed that employees of highly automated companies spend 30% less time in informal communication with colleagues. This directly impacts social capital, that invisible network of connections that makes an organization more than just a set of job descriptions. Engineer Sergey from an aerospace company recalls, "Before, we would solve complex problems over lunch, in spontaneous conversations. Now half the team works remotely, and the other half interacts through task management systems. Problems are solved, but the spark that arises from live communication has disappeared." Paradoxically, technologies designed to connect people often create new barriers. Virtual meetings cannot fully replace in-person encounters. Neuroscientists explain this by the lack of a full exchange of non-verbal cues, which constitute up to 80% of human communication. Progressive companies recognize this problem and seek balance. At Google, after automating routine processes, mandatory connection days were introduced, when employees gather in the office not to solve tasks, but to strengthen team spirit. Another approach is demonstrated by the Swedish company IKEA, which created hybrid spaces where robots perform logistical functions. But recreation areas and creative hubs remain exclusively human territories. Social capital in the age of automation requires conscious cultivation. It is necessary to purposefully create opportunities for informal communication, even if the main work processes are automated. As one of the Microsoft executives said, "We automate processes, but not relationships." In a world of algorithms, human connections become not less, but more valuable. In a world where technology changes faster than we can get used to it, adaptive thinking becomes not a luxury, but a necessity. Psychological flexibility is the ability to maintain balance when the ground shifts beneath your feet. How to develop this ability in an era of total automation? The answer lies in the conscious restructuring of thought patterns. Programmer Igor, who lost his job after the introduction of generative AI, recounts, "For a month, I felt sorry for myself, and then I realized a simple truth. My value is not in knowing a specific programming language, but in the ability to solve problems." This shift in focus, from identification with specific skills to recognizing one's fundamental abilities, is a key element of adaptive thinking. Psychologists identify three main strategies for developing such thinking. The first is mindfulness practice. Meditation and mindfulness techniques help separate facts from emotional reactions, which is critically important when faced with change. The second strategy is cultivating curiosity. Curiosity neutralizes the fear of the unknown, transforming it into interest. The third is the development of emotional intelligence. The ability to recognize and manage one's emotions allows one to maintain clarity of thought in stressful situations. A practical exercise recommended by psychologists is rephrasing threats into challenges. Instead of, "I'm losing my job due to automation," think in terms of, "Automation creates an opportunity to seek a more creative role." This shift in perception activates problem-solving centers in the brain, rather than anxiety centers. Another effective technique is temporal perspective. Imagine yourself 5 years after the current changes and describe how you adapted. This thought experiment activates neural pathways associated with adaptation, making real adjustment more likely. You can learn at any age. This phrase sounds encouraging, but for many it evokes internal resistance. Psychologists identify 3 key barriers hindering adult retraining in the age of automation. The first is fear of failure. Marina, a former accountant with 25 years of experience, admits, "I was afraid to look foolish. At 50, to sit at a desk and not understand elementary things. It's humiliating." The second barrier is fixed mindset, the belief that our abilities are unchangeable. "I'm a humanities person. Programming isn't for me." Such self-identification becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The third barrier is time perspective. Many feel that at 40 or 50 it's too late to start a new career. However, research shows that the adult brain possesses amazing plasticity. The key difference from learning in youth is that adults need context and connection to life experience. The most successful retraining programs are built on the principle of from the known to the unknown. When a former truck driver studies logistics algorithms, relying on his knowledge of roads and routes, learning is several times more effective. Victor's example is telling. A former miner who became an industrial safety specialist. His training program didn't start with abstract theories, but with the analysis of real situations he observed in the mine. Each new concept was linked to existing experience. Another example is Anna, a nurse with 30 years of experience who mastered the management of medical information systems. The key to success was understanding that I wasn't learning something completely new, but simply translating my knowledge of patients and procedures into the language of technology, she explains. Looking ahead to the coming decades, we see a labor market that will continue to transform at an unprecedented pace. Analysts predict that by 2030, up to a third of all existing professions will undergo radical changes or disappear entirely. Their place will be taken by specialties about which we can only guess today. Designers of virtual ecosystems, ethical consultants for artificial intelligence, digital detoxification specialists. The psychological landscape of future labor is shaped around several key trends. The first is the flourishing of the gig economy, where permanent employment gives way to project-based work. Such a model offers unprecedented freedom, but creates a new type of anxiety: project uncertainty. Psychologists are already observing this phenomenon among freelancers who live in constant search of the next assignment. The second trend is the blurring of the line between work and personal life. The remote format, which became the norm after the pandemic, requires new skills of psychological self-regulation. The third is the transition from a linear career to a portfolio model of professional development, where a person simultaneously develops several areas of activity. The most optimistic scenario for the future assumes that automation will free us for more creative, meaningful activities. Routine tasks will be performed by machines, and people will focus on solving complex problems requiring empathy, creativity, and ethical judgment. However, this scenario requires serious social innovations, from universal basic income to a radical rethinking of education. The pessimistic scenario warns of the possibility of technological unemployment and deepening inequality between those who possess technology and those who are displaced by it. Which path society chooses depends not so much on the technologies themselves as on our collective decisions and values. In a world where algorithms and robots are becoming a common part of the work landscape, we arrive at a fundamental question: what makes us human? Automation doesn't just change the tools of labor. It forces us to rethink the very essence of human existence. Machines have surpassed us in calculation speed, precision of movement, and even in some aspects of creativity. But they cannot experience the joy of discovery, compassion for others, or the deep satisfaction of a job well done. This is our undeniable advantage. Technology frees us from routine, not for idleness, but for a fuller manifestation of our humanity. Psychological well-being in an automated world requires a balance between technological progress and human needs. We need to create systems that amplify our best qualities, rather than suppress them. Companies that implement automation with consideration for employees' psychological needs achieve not only economic benefits, but also create an environment where people can thrive. The key principles of such an approach are meaningful tasks, space for creativity and autonomy, opportunities for social interaction, and continuous development. The future of work is not a dystopia where humans become an appendage of machines, nor a utopia of universal abundance without labor. It is a world where technology takes on what can be automated, freeing us for what can only be human. Our task is to learn to live in this new world, maintaining a balance between technological progress and eternal human values.